We're going to discuss Jupiter in the first house in each of the 12 zodiac signs. That's quite a lot of information, so let's make sure that we go about it in a systematic way. Let's start at the very beginning and talk about what the first house itself represents. As you can see here, the first house is physically or literally the area of the sky that is closest to the eastern horizon. In other words, it's the sign that is rising in the east constitutes the first house. So all the symbolism of the first house stems from the fact that the east is where the sun rises. Sunrise represents the beginnings of things. And so that's why the first house represents the birth. Because it represents the birth, it represents the thing which is born, the body. And because it represents the body, it represents what the body makes tangible, which is the self. On that subject of tangibility, beginnings, really philosophically speaking, are not truly beginnings, but yet just the coming into visibility. And so the first house has that nature of making things manifest. It has to do with things becoming real and tangible. And thus, it has to do with the real tangible traits that a person has. Now that's the first house. Now that we're up to date on what that represents, if we want to talk about Jupiter in this house, let's take a second to review what Jupiter itself represents. Jupiter fundamentally symbolizes positivity. Positivity is represented by the plus sign. And so Jupiter is a planet of plussing things, which means increase. So it has to do with growth and abundance or success. Since it's about increasing things, it's about bringing things into being. So it's the planet of creation. And this is why it has to do with reproduction and children. Since it has to do with creation, reproduction, and children, it's the planet of parenting. Bringing up children, raising children. So it has to do not only with parents, but also with teachers and guides of all sorts, which can include gurus, priests, any kind of word you want to use for that. What do teachers and guides and parents give to the children in order to make them grow up? Actually, it's guidance, wisdom. So Jupiter is the planet of wisdom. This is why it's associated with philosophy or religion. Another sense of the concept of positivity is optimism. Optimism is basically the trust that things will be good. And so Jupiter is the planet that signifies trust and faith. Optimism is basically a generous outlook. And so Jupiter is a planet of generosity. Hence, it has to do with charity and therefore your virtue or your ethics. And because it has to do with your virtue and your ethics, it symbolizes your honesty and your lawfulness. Now that we are kind of refreshed about what the first house represents and what Jupiter represents, we can put the two of them side by side and see where they link up. For example, we said that Jupiter has to do with positivity. The first house has to do with your character traits. Positivity is a character trait. So putting in Jupiter in the first house links up, or it like highlights the positivity as a character trait. Another thing is that Jupiter has to do with increase, bringing things into being. And the first house has to do with things coming into being, manifestation. Another thing is that Jupiter has to do with children, and the first house has to do with birth. So these are the three pillars or key points or seeds of a good interpretation of Jupiter in the first house. If you let these seeds grow, or if you build on these pillars or flesh out these key points, you'll get good, reliable, solid interpretation for what Jupiter represents in the first house. Let's do that a little bit now. So Jupiter represents positivity, and the first house represents the character trait of positivity, right? So what does it mean then for a person who has Jupiter in the first house? Well, basically they have a positive nature. So we'll call that an auspicious nature because that's what auspiciousness means. So in other words, we would expect the person to be gracious, generous, helpful, smart, beautiful, wealthy. These are different options of what positivity or abundance can look like as a character trait. The exact way that it will look in an individual depends on all the rest of the conditions in that individual's chart. We also said that Jupiter has to do with increase and the first house has to do with manifestation. So they both have to do with bringing things into being. So what does that mean to a person with Jupiter in the first house? It means you will do good things. So there's two senses to that. One sense is that you're moral and the other sense is that you're successful. Moral means you do good things, like you don't do bad things. And successful means you do things good. You don't do things bad. You do things well. So that's the idea. It's the ability of Jupiter to bring things into being and the ability of the first house to bring things into being links up. And so the individual Jupiter in the first house is good at bringing things into being. So in other words, they're effective in their actions. They tend to be successful. We can also say that they're secure because they are good in their deeds in both senses. They don't get backlash or they don't have things malfunction on them. The third thing we said was that Jupiter has to do with children and the first house has to do with birth. So a person with Jupiter in the first house probably has children. Or in other words, in a more abstract sense, they're parental or they're able to guide people and help people grow. And also they're creative, they're expressive, they have a lot of byproduct. Also, it doesn't only indicate that they birth well, it indicates that they're born well. So that means that their body is probably healthy, therefore it lives long. This now is our basic theory or baseline expectation for what Jupiter represents when it's in the first house. This baseline is going to get modified based on the conditions that surround Jupiter in the first house. So now it would be very useful. So now it would be helpful to look at specific conditions. For example, what sign is the first house? So let's start with Aries. If Jupiter is in the first house in Aries, then it's primarily the 9th Lord and also the 12th Lord. So what that's going to do is that's going to increase the philosophical nature or the educational nature more than the baseline of Jupiter in the first house. So for example, we have that basic idea of positivity and character means they have auspiciousness, so probably they have good things. Now, on this list, if it's Aries, first house, then we have to add, they probably have more learning. But now we should also include the nature of Aries itself. So here you have a person who's got a productivity which is quite, educated or intellectual, but also it's very unique and self-defined. An example of a well-known person with Jupiter and Aries in the first house is Johannes Brahms. Now, Brahms was a very philosophical and intellectual and ideological person. And what's very noteworthy about him is that he was agnostic in the face of great pressure towards being Christian. So that really shows you how the philosophy and the education and the sophistication in this person is quite high, yet it's quite self-determined. He's not just following a norm, he's thinking for himself. He's reserving his own ideas and he doesn't want to be put into boxes with other people. Other important character traits of Brahms is he's quite witty. You can see this from his Mercury. And also, he has a very changeling nature, a very unpredictable nature. For example, he changes his appearance very drastically. And you can see that from the proximity of his first lord to Rahu. You can look at the bullet points here for more details, or you can pause the video to really think about this, or look at this chart on your own. The birth data is on the screen now. Just to quickly review, his first lord, that Mars with Rahu, is actually his first lord in Raja Yoga. And it's also in Neech Panga because it's domiciled in a Navamsha with the moon. The ninth lord is on the ascendant, the benefics bracket, the ascendant, the moon is in the ninth house. So all of these things are really enhancing his ability to be famous. That's the context in which he has this placement of Jupiter in Aries' first house. And he's very artistic. From the rest of the context of the chart, his third and his ninth lords are on the ascendant. His Venus is in Rohini in the third house, and it's aspected by the 11th lord. The ninth lord is aspecting the fifth house. Now let's have a look at Jupiter in Taurus, first house. So now Jupiter is the 8th and 11th lord. So this Jupiter in the first house has a more sexy or attractive or appealing nature than the baseline stock interpretation of Jupiter in the first house. And since it's in Taurus, we can say that this individual's productivity will not only be attractive, but it's very compelling and sort of enduring. An example of a famous person with Jupiter in Taurus, the first house, is Martin Luther King Jr. Indeed, he's extremely attractive, also quite sexually active, very, very compelling, irresistible person. Besides just having Jupiter in the first house in Taurus, he has an exalted Venus with his moon in the 11th house. He is the second Lord Mercury on the 10th house cusp, second Lord Mercury on the 10th house cusp, so he's excellent with words. He has Rahu close to his ascendant, so he's not typical. He's revolutionary or rebellious. He has Mars and Saturn in mutual aspect, so he has a Raja Yoga of these two malefics, which means he's tough, he has strength, he can stand up against things. Now let's take a look at Jupiter in Gemini first house. Now, Jupiter is primarily the 7th lord and also the 10th lord. So what you're getting here is a clash between 7 and 10 being unstable houses, houses of movement, but the first house being a stable house, a house of manifestation. So this will decrease the stability from what we would expect otherwise of Jupiter in the first house, but will increase the attractiveness or allure. So we can say that this person is productive in a commercially attractive way because this is the Lord of the 7th and the 10th. And additionally, it's in Gemini, so they're communicative and interactive and commercial. They are, in other words, they're like popular. So an example of a person famous with Jupiter in Gemini first house is Greta Garbo. Indeed, she fits this bill very, very well. Her first lord and her moon are exalted, so that's increasing the context of fame. Her fifth lord Venus is in the 3rd house, while her moon is exalted, and her 11th lord aspects the ascendant. That's really giving a lot of talent. And her 9th lord is joined Ketu in the 9th house, while Mars aspects Jupiter in the ascendant. So this person is more kind of selfish and self-interested than you would otherwise expect from Jupiter in the first house. Next, we can look at Jupiter in Cancer first house. Now, Jupiter is the 6th lord and the 9th. So this adds a sense of dutifulness, dharmicness, morality. Additionally, if Jupiter's in Cancer, it's exalted. So we can say this person's productivity, their output, is very morally dutiful, and also it highlights the caring nature. A person who has this is Sri Rama, the famous Dharma avatar, the avatar who exemplifies political morality, dutifulness. Besides just having Jupiter in the first, it's also with the first lord in the first house. So all these effects that we expect from Jupiter in the first house are more magnified or more pronounced. Besides that, he's got a chart with 4 exalted planets. So it's just kind of like makes everything great. Next, let's talk about Jupiter in the Leo first house. Now Jupiter is the 5th lord and also the 8th lord. So again, it's becoming sexy or attractive, and it has this intellectual sense to its appeal. So we can say this person produces things in a smart way and with quite a bit of confidence. An example is Katie Holmes. She's quite an intelligent individual, and there are 3 things contributing to that besides just having Jupiter in the first house. She also has Mercury in the 5th. She has the first lord in the 5th, and she has a house exchange between the 1st and the 5th. She's also quite beautiful, and Jupiter in the first house has that potential to it. But besides that, she also has the moon in the first house. And besides that, she has Venus in Scorpio, which is very sexy or appealing. Katie Holmes is also a religious person, but got into religious difficulties with Scientology. So she has a 9th lord, which is exalted, yet it's in the 6th house. Now let's talk about Jupiter in the Virgo first house. In this case, Jupiter is the 4th lord and also the 7th lord. So these 2 houses have to do with things being invisible or becoming invisible, 4 and 7. But the first house is about things becoming visible. So here, when you have the 4th and the 7th lord in the first house, you have this dichotomy between hiding things and showing things. So we can say that this person's productivity is complicated and quite dexterous, because that's the nature of Virgo. So overall, we think they have a lot of dexterity in manifesting hidden things or hiding manifested things. An example of a famous person with Jupiter in a Virgo first house is the illusionist David Copperfield. Besides just having Jupiter in a Virgo first house, his Jupiter is with the 12th lord, who's the sun. The 12th lord as the sun is also a dichotomy between hiding and showing, and the 12th lord in the first house is also a dichotomy between hiding and showing. So he's really, really highlighting this ability of hiding and showing. And he's a magician, he's an illusionist. His inner planets are extremely bright, so he's pretty expert or intelligent. His 3rd and 8th lord Mars is in a mutual aspect with Jupiter. So 3rd and 8th lord, it's like mystifying or mystical talent, especially manual talent. And that's influencing his Jupiter in Virgo, which itself represents the ability to hide and show things dexterously. His 5th lord is in the 3rd house, while his Venus is in a mutual aspect with the 11th lord that indicates being artistic or being a performer, and it also, especially the Venus and 11th lord mutual aspect, indicates great wealth. Now, how about Jupiter in a Libra first house? In this case, Jupiter is the 3rd lord and the 6th. So this will increase the talent aspect of auspiciousness, but it will decrease the generousness or ampleness or the ease or luxury that could be possible with Jupiter in the first house. So we can say that their productivity, the person is productive in a very talented or refined way and very sophisticated. An example of a person with Jupiter in the Libra first house is Jennifer Aniston, who is kind of noteworthy for not being able to have children. So why is that? We thought Jupiter in the first house indicates a person that does have children. Yes, she has Jupiter in the first house, but it's very close to Ketu. And it's not that close to the ascendant. Besides that, her 5th lord is debilitated, and that 5th lord is Saturn in Revati Nakshatra, which is the nakshatra of parenting. On top of that, her 12th lord is in the 5th house. Besides all those factors, also in the 5th house is Mercury, but it's deeply in Sandhi, or it's right on the border. And so that reflects in the educational challenges that she had, like dyslexia and so forth. She's a very artistic person, obviously. She's a capable actress. So the 11th Lord is on the 5th house cusp. That's very important for talent. The 10th Lord is on the 3rd cusp, and the 3rd Lord is in the 1st, aspected by Venus. Now let's turn our attention to Jupiter in a Scorpio 1st house. Jupiter here is the 2nd Lord and also the 5th. So Jupiter in Scorpio in the 1st house is more fertile and intelligent. So we're going to say the person's productivity is very ample, yet elusive or mysterious because it's scorpionic. An example here is Matahari, the spy exotic dancer. She has a lot of planets, 3 planets in Ashlesha, which is the nakshatra of mystique and allure and seduction. She has 2 Raja Yogas in her 5th house, so it's going to highlight the ability of Jupiter in the 1st to give education or intelligence. She's a spy. She works in intelligence and she has to be super intelligent. She has a Raja Yoga in the 10th with the 11th Lord, so that indicates fame and also artistic talent. She's an exotic dancer. And then on that theme of artistic talent and everything, 3rd Lord in the 5th, 5th Lord in the 1st, 1st Lord joining the 11th Lord. Now we could talk about Jupiter in Sagittarius 1st house. Well, here Jupiter is the 1st Lord and the 4th. So this Jupiter has more ability to be disclosive. In other words, revealing of things which are internal. What helps is that Jupiter's domicile here. So we can say that the productivity of this person is disclosive. In other words, it will reveal things. It's revealing of things. Yet it's also ambitious and idealistic. So it's idealistically disclosive. An example of such a person is Hermann Hesse. Why is he so philosophical? Well, Jupiter in the 1st house indicates that a bit, right? In the sense of having auspiciousness means you have knowledge. But especially if it's in Sagittarius, now it becomes disclosive or able to show internal things. So it becomes philosophical or reflective. And his particular Jupiter is not just in Sagittarius, but it's Vargotama Sagittarius, which means that it's also in the Sagittarius subdivision, Navamsha. So it's very philosophical Jupiter in the 1st house. Besides that, this Jupiter is in a mutual aspect with a domicile Mercury forming a Raja Yoga, so that's adding intelligence into this picture. His 5th Lord is in Raja Yoga with Rahu in Pisces. So you can say that's also adding intelligence, but it's a specific kind of intelligence, which is quite spiritual or psychological. And finally, you can also take note that his moon is with all the malefics, really. It's with Mars and Saturn and then Rahu. And that reflects on how he has difficult personal life. Now, how about Jupiter in Capricorn 1st house? Jupiter here would be the 12th Lord and also the 3rd. So this is going to change this baseline interpretation of Jupiter in the 1st by adding a lot more toughness. In the baseline, we're thinking the person is very generous and giving, but not when Jupiter's in Capricorn in the 1st house. Transform that generosity into toughness. So we're going to say that this person's productivity is kind of desperate. They're trying hard to do something. And so they're intense about things. And they're very tenacious in how they work. So for example, Malcom X, so his so-called debilitated Jupiter here is actually exalted in the Navamsha. And it's in a mutual Nichbanga Raja Yoga with Mars and aspected by Saturn. So this man is extremely strong in dealing with challenges. That's what all that is saying. Mercury is on his 5th house cusp, so he's intelligent. Mars is on the 7th house cusp. So it's even reducing the generosity even more and giving a sense of being militant, having a militant way of interacting with the world. How about Jupiter in Aquarius 1st house? Now Jupiter is the 11th and also the second lord. So that's increasing the potential for prosperity and likability. So with Jupiter in the first house, take the baseline of Jupiter and say they are appreciated for these qualities. And they have a social orientation, Aquarian orientation towards how they use these qualities of Jupiter in the first house. For example, Barack Obama. What's notable about his Jupiter is that it's in a mutual aspect with Mercury, which is his fifth lord, coinciding with his moon being in the fifth house. So he's a very intelligent man. He has 2 Raja Yogas in his 7th house. So he's appealing and likable, especially on a widespread or social level, because his ascendant is Aquarius. His first lord is domicile in mutual aspect with the 5th lord Mercury. So he's a very strong individual and he's very smart. Finally, let's have a look at Jupiter in Pisces in the first house. In this case, it is the 10th lord and also the first lord. So that is going to increase the ability to become famous or renowned or respected. We will say that the productivity, therefore, is well rewarded. And it has an ideological or Piscean nature to it. An example of somebody with Jupiter and Pisces in the first house is Pope Benedict XVI. Now, one important thing about his chart is his sun is exalted in the second house as the 6th lord. So the exalted sun as the 6th lord really is giving the impression of somebody who has a lot of personal authority. His 9th lord is in the 4th house while aspecting the 4th lord. So 9th house topics are very important to this person's mind. In other words, they're very interested in ideology and religion. Mercury here is debilitated, while Mars and Saturn both aspect the 7th house cusp. So this person was really poor at communicating, bumbling in strategy about how to deal with society. Confirming that Mercury, Venus, and Mars are all highly sunny or very close to their border. So that's decreasing personal interest in interaction and sensitivity in interaction with others. So that's Jupiter in the first house and all 12 zodiac signs. Which one do you have? If you want to know more about that and also the whole context of the whole chart that it sits in, I recommend that you check out my birth chart overview. Here's some information about that. To understand the whole context of your chart, the soil in which your interpretive seeds grow, then visit my website, vicdekara.com, and click Readings. My complete chart report explains each and every nook and cranny of your chart and will keep you occupied in self-discovery for years. I also have 2 groundbreaking new reports. The first of these, Your Nakshatra, organizes your active nakshatras in order of their importance to you and presents the fundamental interpretations for the planets that occupy them. And the newest report, Star Strength, uses a system called Tara Bala to unfold 90 interpretations of the nuanced relationships between all the planets in your chart, which paints a rich and detailed picture of how your various strengths cooperate or compete with each other. Order these or any of my reports and accelerate your journey to deeper self-understanding.